Hey, David, just to let you know, you have a hot mic right now.
Thank you, Jed.
All from 1, 4, 8, 0, 3, 1, 8, 9, 2, 1, 6.
Still got a hot mic, brother.
Oh no, I'm on the phone.
Okay, I have 1 o'clock on my phone, which is when we said we were going to resume. Mr. Court Reporter, are we good to go?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go back on the record. Just admitting one more person. And Mr. Borman, please call your next witness.
Excuse me, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I may
Yes.
interrupt. I guess I already have. Rick Alvedris again for PNM. I did want to note for the record that we did upload the PNM Exhibit 8.1, which was the missing exhibit, and also sent an email notification to everyone about that. So, if it's, I think
Yeah,
at
I
least
did.
conditionally admitted it, we'd move for admission on the record.
Yes, I did receive that. So the request is for PNM Exhibit 8.1 to be admitted onto the record. Any objection?
No, sir.
Okay, it is admitted.
Thank you. And I apologize for the interruption.
No problem. Okay, Mr. Borman, proceed.
Thank you, staff. Would call Mr. Darren Zigich, please.
Mr. Ziggett, would you raise your right hand, please? You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Zigich.
Mr. Borman,
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission as an engineer in their
As
engineering
part of,
bureau.
oh,
Sorry.
as part of your duties in that position, did you review the application by Public Service Company of New Mexico that is the subject of this proceeding, along with the testimony and exhibits filed therewith?
I did.
And based upon that review, did you prepare or participate in preparing testimony regarding that application?
Yes, I did.
Okay, you should have a document marked Staff Exhibit 4. Do you have that document?
I do, yes.
Can you identify that document?
That is my sworn direct testimony for this case.
Okay. Was that document prepared by you or under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
And is that document corrected in such a fashion as to remove the name of the special services customer in this case?
Yes, I apologize for that slip up. I'm still learning getting my feet wet here, so.
Okay. So it's technically it's the testimony and exhibits that you filed with the corrections made to remove that name, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
No.
If I ask you the same questions today as are set forth in Staff Exhibit 1 or Staff Exhibit 4, excuse me, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Are those answers true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Do you adopt Staff Exhibit 4 as your sworn testimony in this matter?
I do.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, at this time, I move admission of Staff Exhibit 4.
The request is for Staff Exhibit 4 to be admitted onto the record, which I'll address in a second. Is anyone else having trouble bringing Staff Exhibit 4 up on Dropbox? Can everyone else see it clearly? For some reason, it came up as 11% on mine, and I'm having trouble enlarging it.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I've had a problem with that. It's tiny. So what I did, I just downloaded it from the commission's site.
Okay.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, I apologize if there are issues in accessing it. I think part of the issue is that I think it's Exhibit DKZ1 is very tiny, or actually it's very big, but all the information on it is in very small font. Might, if I could try uploading it, I don't know if I can do that obviously this minute, but I could try uploading that staffing or exhibit DKZ1 separately, and perhaps that might make it easier for the parties if they need to look at that.
Okay, I'm just gonna note that we may have to take a little bit more time than normal when we're referring to the exhibit. But motion is for staff exhibit 4 to be admitted onto the record. Any objection? Hearing none, it is admitted.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. Mr. Zigich is available for cross-examination.
Okay, and as we indicated this morning, PNM will begin the cross-examination. You're on mute.
Good afternoon, Mr. Zigich. My name is Rick Alvidrez, and I'm one of the lawyers for Public Service Company of New Mexico. And we haven't met before, but it's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Readers.
And as I understand it, is this the first case thus far that you've had the opportunity to provide live testimony?
Live, yeah. I just finished up a written on another case, but that never went to this this excitement. So
Okay, so have you? I mean, I looked at your bio and your prior work experience. Did you ever testify in regulatory proceedings before this one in live context?
I have done environmental proceedings where the roles were flipped. I was not the regulator or the regular party. I was the regulated party. So that's kind of the extent of my experience. It's more of an environmental case like that. So
and did you provide? I'm sorry,
yes.
Speaking of you, apologize. And in that capacity, did you provide testimony, live testimony? Either.
Yes.
Okay. And how many times prior would you say you've testified in regulatory proceedings live?
Probably just that one time. I testified in that was a personal case for special education IDEA case, but otherwise, yeah, pretty limited.
Okay, and this is your first case where you provided testimony on utility resource approval, correct?
Correct.
Were you listening in or watching during the testimony presented by staff witness Sidler?
Yes.
And do you recall that he discussed what he thought, I guess, an option available to PNM would be to operate its gas plants in a different manner in order to arrive at a more acceptable reserve margin?
Yes.
Do you agree with him?
I can't say I understood that discussion very well.
Okay.
So
Well, I'm sorry.
yeah, I can't agree or disagree. I guess I just don't follow that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, do you recall that he said he wasn't sure whether whether the reserve margins that PNM was talking about reflected operation of the PNM gas resources at full capacity? Do you recall that?
Yeah. And I guess the only way that would be a possibility is if there's, like all of the other large plants, like the San Juan generating station had shared ownership. And if you could borrow energy from one owner to, to provide your own. But other than that, as far as I know, the capacity is all dedicated to PNM's resource. So I am not sure what addition there would be right now.
Well, in terms of the gas resources, I mean, with the exception of Luna, PNM either owns outright or contracts for the full capacity of all of its gas units, right?
Yeah, I don't know those contractual requirements. I'm just going by what the capacities are shown in like different filings like the IRP or something.
Have you read the rebuttal testimony of Nicholas Phillips that was filed in this case?
Yeah, yeah, I have.
Can I have you turn to a exhibit in his testimony? And is that something you have access to? It's PNM Exhibit 8.
Yes, I do. Got it up.
And what I'd like for you to take a look at is PNM Exhibit 8, and specifically within that is PNM Exhibit NLP1. It's the very first exhibit that's in his testimony.
Yeah. Scroll up. I was down in NLP 8. So get up there.
Let me know when you're there, and
Yes,
others.
sorry. Okay, which page?
NLP 1 is a one-page exhibit.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, you're right.
So
Okay.
do you see about a quarter of the way down?
Mm-hmm.
There is a bold sentence, total natural gas resources, paren MW, plus paren.
Yes.
And that you understand that to be megawatt.
Yes.
And above that, do you understand that those are the gas resources that PNM has access to?
Yes.
And you understand that this exhibit, at least the first column under before 2026 resource additions, shows the reserve margin that
Yes.
PNM has. You do understand.
Yes.
And so do you understand that the reserve margin that's indicated of 3.87% down towards the very bottom of the page accounts for the entire megawatts available with regard to PNM's gas fleet?
You mean the 952?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you understand
Yes.
that's
I believe that's the accredited capacity, right? For the gas fleet. It's not the nameplate capacity, but the accredited.
so that's all that's available on PNM's system, correct?
The dependable, yeah, I think what you can depend on basically is.
And doesn't this actually show that even when PNM is utilizing all of its gas resources that it can depend on, in conjunction with all the other resources that it can depend on, its reserve margin is still only 3.87%?
Yes, that's what it shows there, yes.
So, Mr. Sidler's thoughts about the potential for utilizing the gas resources differently would not improve PNM's reserve margin, correct?
Yeah, and not unless there's something else there that isn't apparent, yeah.
And is it, I'm sorry?
Sorry, a motorcycle went by outside and you know, those guys,
I know Mr. Sidler rides a motorcycle, as do I. Yeah.
yeah, no, it wasn't him. This was a smaller one. This isn't a Harley. This is
Okay. So, is it staff's opinion that the 3.87% reserve margin is adequate?
no. You have to remember this table came in after testimony was delivered. So, you know, that's fundamentally a different set of data that was not available that, you know, when we were reviewing the application initially.
Okay, well, as part of your review, did you do any analysis to attempt to derive a reserve margin or
I
making that
did.
recommendation?
Yeah, I did. And frankly, I think I know Mr. Phillips doesn't agree with my methodology. He thinks it's maybe crude and unrealistic, but it's you know, based on averages, but it's the data that I had. Again, my point that we really haven't been able to access the data that's usable for us to do a decent review, you know, a cursory review of what the need is. But under my, you know, piecing together different pieces of information, I came up with very similar numbers when you add in the batteries that are proposed here to what was presented. You know, so yeah, I don't dispute the capacity constraint, and I never did in my testimony doesn't dispute that. It merely says we cannot verify it, therefore I cannot confirm or approve. So, you know, unfortunately, we're in a black and white situation here where you either have to verify that something is needed or not. And if you can't verify one, then you're kind of stuck with the other option.
Well, staff submitted discovery in this case, correct?
Correct. And
So
we
go ahead.
You know, we've got pushback, unfortunately, at times. And so that data was slow to come in and still was not fully complete. So it was a little problematic getting what we believed we needed for clarity.
Well, when you say it was slow coming in, when did staff issue its discovery in this case?
Well, we had 4 different discoveries, and you know, sure, I take responsibility for some of the delay because I was still learning the process of this discovery. You know, like I said, I come from an environmental regulatory background more, and there you pick up the phone with your counterpart at the regulated entity and just get the information. Here it's a little more formal, and I'm just weeding through that formality. But you know, when we did ask for some operating data and some additional data, you know, we got the standard pushback of that isn't, you know, PNM's not required to create data that they don't have. So you get the data dump of just massive amounts of numbers, some that don't even have units, and fundamental to engineering calculation are checking units. And if you can't even check units, how do you even check the reasonableness of the calculation? So it took a while to get what we believed we needed to at least try to visualize the situation, but we still never got to the granularity that I think really was needed for making a true determination. So I tried to put together what I put together, but Mr. Phillips says that that can't be used to determine anything. It's not complete, but yet it gets pretty close to showing that there is a need. You know, so, but again, it was just who's providing that, and what's our role to go gather that information.
Well, let me see if I understand. Is it your testimony that your calculations, your analysis shows that there is need PNM system?
From the information I could gather, yes. But the application itself didn't have that information in it. I had to go find that information, and that's so basically I find the application to be somewhat incomplete. That's a term that we used under the Clean Air Act, an incomplete application, therefore it was denied because the data wasn't standalone, incomplete. So that's kind of my threshold there.
We'll get into that. Okay. A little bit more detail. I do want to follow up though that PNM did ultimately provide the data that staff requested. I mean, to the extent PNM had it, PNM provided it to staff to review, right?
Yes. Again, though it didn't. It was large data, again, better formatted so that you could actually do something with it. But still, it was more granular load data, but we still didn't have the more granular resource production data. So without both, you know, it's like what time is the problem? Can you put a date and time on the problem period when you really need these batteries? We still don't have clarity on that. And you know, in some of the rebuttal, it's getting a little more clear, but you know, again, that was after what we already testified to. So
did staff didn't ask for any PNM to conduct any analysis or modeling, correct?
No.
You know, I guess have you read the testimony that NM area filed in this case?
Yes, I have.
And did it appear that NM area was able to analyze the data and confirm what PNM had presented about a need for additional resources was accurate?
That was their claim. I don't know how they took that massive amount of data, and I mean, Servum is a proprietary, you know, system, you know, program, and how they took that massive data and actually analyzed it, I do not know. So I can't really confirm or deny that they actually did a sound analysis on that. And again, I'm not saying that everything has to be checked to the T. It's what is the threshold of being able to analyze something and verify a need. And I didn't feel that what we had rose to that level.
So you've had a chance to review the rebuttal testimony submitted by PNM. Does that alter your recommendation?
It provides more clarity, but I think I was getting to that point with what I had. So it would just, again, the primary point was we needed more data up front. The application should have stood alone. Mr. Phillips, you know, points you to 6 different cases where data was provided to the commission. I appreciate that, but I wasn't around when those were presented. So I had a narrow scope of information, and what they presented initially was not adequate to make a determination. again, my own analysis, picking up other pieces of information, seems to run in line with the rebuttal information and show that not only is there a need in 2026, there's probably a need today in 2025. This came out yesterday. So I can't sit here and say there is no need for additional resources. That would be non-responsible.
Okay. So it sounds like your main complaint is that the massive data that you're seeking isn't filed as part of the application process. Is that your primary complaint now?
It always was. I had three issues that PNM didn't prove the need by basically telling us the story. You know, take all that 8,400 different runs of Servum and, you know, present it in a format that somebody can reasonably assess the need, and that just never happened. There was testimony saying that it meets the need, but there was nothing to back it up that we could even check or verify with other data. So it was lacking as a standalone. There was a lot of pages on cost, and I appreciate that. But as an engineer, cost is secondary to me. It's first determined, is there a need? And with the data that was presented, I just couldn't do that. And then we get into the whole other piece about the IRP and stuff. So there was a two-pronged front there that I felt were lacking, the data and the two-pronged.
Let's talk a little bit about the IRP.
Okay.
And specifically PNM's 2020 IRP.
Yeah.
And do you have your testimony in front of you?
I do, yes.
And on page 5, line 18, beginning line 18, you indicate that PNM's 2020 IRP only made mention of a potential future change to a 0.1 LOLE in a footnote on page 45, right?
Yes.
Do you have, again, Mr. Phillips' rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And in that, do you have it electronically?
I do, yeah.
So if you go to page 211 of that testimony in the total document, I think it's easier to find that way, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. The 4-year action plan?
Yes, tell me when you're there.
Yeah, I'm there.
Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you understand that to be the action plan, right? For the 4-year action plan out of the 2020 PNM IRP, right?
Yes.
And do you see under the heading, explore cost-effective options to maintain system supply and reliability?
Yes.
And if you go down to the fourth bullet, do you see that?
Yes.
Can you read that into the record?
The fourth bullet is transition to the industry standard loss of load expectation 0.1 days per year, 1 day in 10 years, to maintain best practices in reliability planning for our system.
So contrary to what you testified to, the action plan actually specifically talked about moving to the 0.1 LOLE, correct?
Yes, it does.
And the 2020 IRP was approved by the commission in case number 21-00033 UT, was it not?
Yes.
And it was actually approved upon the recommendation of staff. Isn't that also true?
You know, again, I wasn't here, but I'll assume that to be the case.
Do you know? I mean, I'm not asking you to assume something. Did you look into it?
No, I
Okay.
know that it was approved. I don't know what the staff's opinion is on it.
And you don't dispute that the 0.1 LOLE is industry standard, do you?
No.
So let's talk about the work, the data that you've mentioned, and do that. Let's look at your testimony. And I'd like for you to look at its exhibit to your testimony, DRZ 2. Or I'm sorry, DKZ 2. And that begins at page 34, the electronic version of your testimony. Do you see that?
Sorry. Lost it. Yeah, I got it.
And if we go to page 39 of that same document, you understand that to be a printout of the hourly system load for 2026?
Yes.
And this is information, just for the record, that PNM provided you, right?
Yeah, very, very late in the process, February 22nd. So yes.
You're not saying it was untimely, are you? It came, within the time allowed under discovery when you asked for it, right?
Yeah, but we did get pushback on this request.
But
So
the
it wasn't as
pushback,
timely as it could have been.
was resolved quite promptly in favor of staff, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this what is this beginning on page 39? There's
Well, again, the Servum data that was sent to NM area didn't really give us a chance to break out all of these hourly loads. And this has it by month, by date, every hour. This is the predicted load for every month, every day, every hour of the year. And what I wanted to do was, since we had wind and solar average capacity factors that aligned with all of these days and hours of the months of the year, I wanted to be able to try to graph those, overlay them so that I could see, okay, you've got this load, you've got this variable generation, which you don't have control over, but historically it's provided this on this day. And, to do some sort of rudimentary back-looking, deterministic evaluation of what the issue was and where the problem lied. And,
okay, well,
getting to the hour and the day that the problem exists.
this particular printout runs check to page 214 of your exhibit. Does it not?
Yeah, it's every hour, so it's 87, 60 lines of numbers.
And this, that's about 175 pages of these hourly numbers, right, and readings.
Yeah.
And this is the type of data that you're recommending that be included in an application for approval of proposed resources?
Well, I think this was much more usable than the volumes of spreadsheets they sent to NM area.
Well, isn't it true? Go ahead.
You could parse, I didn't need January, February, March, April, if you're really just trying to figure out where that loss of load event could potentially be and where this resource is most needed, you could parse it down to the problem day, the problem month, the problem hour or two, you know. But, you know, that's kind of what we were asking for, or alluding to anyways, and I guess we just didn't get our communication straight. But, you know, that's what I was looking for, was something more granular that we could see the problem. Because we got words, but we didn't. I'm sorry, I'm a visual, I'm an engineer, I'm a visual person. I mean, my first job was reviewing flight software for the space shuttle, and we would have plots of did it make it to orbit or not, you know, and you know, I've always grown up with graphs, and that's been that's helpful in visualizing, I guess, problem.
Would you agree that to provide this type of data with every resource application would add thousands of pages to the application?
Well, like you said, it's a couple hundred pages. You know, this is just one data point. You could put them across. I mean, it could come in a spreadsheet, whatever. You know, I mean, it's these filings are already large. You know, there was a lot of detail, and you know, I appreciate all the contracts, but the contracts alone were 1,100 pages of stuff. You know, and the contracts for me as the engineer didn't tell me the story I was looking to answer. So there was already a lot of stuff in that application that didn't help me answer my question. So yeah, I guess I'm being selfish and asking for a couple hundred more pages of data that actually answers my questions.
Well, it's not a couple hundred more pages. It's really many hundreds more pages at least, right?
Not if you parse it down to the event that's of issue. It could be very streamlined if we really parse it down to what is the issue.
Okay. You didn't provide any guidance in your testimony about specifically what material you believe should be included in the application, right?
No, I don't think it's. I think that's maybe something that, you know, the parties can talk about offline as to what, you know, in the future could better serve everybody's needs, and so that we can move these processes along. You know, I don't want to be combative here. I want to be cooperative and just say this is what I need, and to, you know, to make that final decision and move forward. So you know, I think we've already had some conversations with staff on what we need moving forward to move these along, I guess.
And in fact, PNM had informal, you've referenced them in your testimony, PNM had informal conversations with staff to try and explain and provide the information to you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
PNM was being cooperative in those efforts. Would you agree?
Yes. I think over that, once that initial hurdle is reached, then it will move more smoothly.
So let's get back to your testimony. At page 18, beginning at line 1, you state there in general that geothermal and hydroelectric resources are a, quote, better tool, close quote, compared to the 4-hour batteries. Is that correct?
Well, again, the story was incomplete, you know, and is it energy we need, or is it power that we need? It's kind of that, is this an energy constrained system or a capacity constrained system? And I think Mr. Phillips said right now it's a capacity constrained system, but in the future, according to his testimony and what we talked about in the IRP proceedings, in the future it's going to be an energy constrained system, and 4-hour batteries does not provide, even in the IRP, 4-hour batteries is not firm capacity. And so it's not the proper tool moving forward. It may serve today, but it's not the proper tool in the future potentially.
Well, and as a matter of fact, it will serve in the batteries, where our batteries will plug the hole nicely in 2026, will they not?
That's the assumption, yes. And that's again the data, because if the event happens over a 4 or 5 hour period and you're constrained on your transmission, then you could get into an energy constraint situation, and then the batteries are kind of just dead weight on the system. So it really depends what the situation is, and that'll change. And I know your folks agree with that.
You understand this case is about meeting the needs, peak load in 2026, right?
Yes.
And there are specific hours that have been identified as the, hours that place the system at highest risk, correct?
Well, that's the problem, that hadn't been identified. And I still don't think, Mr. Wintermantle yesterday did talk about, that evening hours, but again, still haven't really shown us how long that period is. And, they've got those transmission constraints that are a bit concerning. Can they recharge those batteries in time the next day? And that, so I mean, granted, something's needed. Is the 4-hour battery the solution? That's just the concern. But I have to go with what they say, but I can't confirm or deny it, that that's the proper tool. That's the dilemma.
You're not able to dispute what Mr. Wintermantle testified to about the hours that place the system at greatest risk, correct?
Correct.
So let's getting back to the geothermal and hydroelectric that you
I just want
propose.
to, excuse me, I just want to interject one thing. Are we nearing the end of your cross exam?
We are. Am I running out of time?
Yeah, I've given you some extra time here, but I just want to make sure we get to the conclusion shortly.
I will. Just a couple more questions, if you can indulge me, and I appreciate the
Thank you.
warning. But just getting back very briefly to the hydroelectric and geothermal, have you done any analysis of what the potential for hydroelectric generation is in arid regions such as New Mexico?
Yeah, no, I think this was more yeah, I should have yeah, there's not much potential for hydro. I mean, we do have 5 hydro facilities in the state. There are four or five. There's at least 4 hydro facilities in New Mexico, and those are all Bureau of Reclamation facilities. And I don't believe PNM has contracts with any of those, but those are existing facilities that have been there for years.
And
but
what's the scale of those?
They're not large. They're 30, 40, 50 megawatts at best. But
And
then the geothermal, I used to be the permitting person for the state for the Lightning Dock facility, and so I know their capacity constraints probably as well as anybody. And I know the issue with geothermal, it's those were just examples that people know about. I'm not saying those are necessarily practical solutions. What I was really getting there again was my cost comparison of, you know, solar and wind requires batteries to really firm them up, and we're discounting that cost versus geothermal and other more stable resources. But, you know, we did talk about, I mean, me and an engineer from Lanel have been up at the San Juan Power Station when it was operating and talked to the plant, both the mine and the power plant, about pumped hydro. And unfortunately, PNM gave up on a DOE grant that would have helped them revitalize the San Juan mine for a pumped hydro facility. So, you know, we definitely, in my past career, I was trying to highlight those opportunities to provide pumped hydro solutions at existing facilities and the monies that were available for that.
Mr. Zigich, my time is more than up, but I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Gould.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Ms. Gould.
I'm typing away as you're talking. Hi, my name is Kelly Gould. I represent New Mexico area, which is a nonprofit comprised of several large energy consumers in New Mexico. I'm sorry, I don't remember if we've met in person or not at the IRP or not. Things sometimes now in Zoom land, I can't remember who I've met in person or not, but it's good to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, nice to meet you.
Okay, so I think that from what I understood of your testimony today in your discussions with Mr. Alvidrez, is that your testimony is really, and please, this is me paraphrasing. If I get it wrong, please correct me. That your testimony is really highlighting the deficiencies in PNM's application and not so much stating that the capacity need is not legitimate. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so you would confirm in your expert opinion that PNM does need the capacity that they are requesting in this application? In some way or form, whether it's the batteries or not, they need something?
It looks that way, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm 100% sold on it, but it's, I mean, I haven't been able to confirm, again, the time, place, date, you know, that kind of granularity would be nice to really solidify that assertion. But yeah, it's looking like definitely there's deficiencies not only to, you know, in 2026, but currently, and something needs to be addressed there. So.
When did you start with commission staff, if you don't mind me asking?
October.
October of 2023. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can articulate what exactly you would need to confirm in your mind that yes, PNM does need this capacity.
Well, like I said, I mean, I think now we have the granularity needed on the load side. And again, I just kind of confirm that that's net load, not gross load, or vice versa. But then also just get a better feel. Like I said, I used average capacity factor data for my wind and solar, and I think I come pretty darn close to the ELCC numbers, even though it was a back of the envelope type of stuff. You know, so, but I'd like some confirmation that, yeah, this is that when they hit that peak, this is their renewable generation, this is the gas generation they can bring online, and then just to confirm that that window doesn't last so long that the batteries become unuseful. And then they end up having to go back to, you know, off system, you know, sales or purchases to make up for that. You know, it's just kind of a system-wide thing. The problem with batteries is their energy drains. Once you put a battery on, you need more power because you put a 15% hit on your energy efficiency. And it's just, it can be a vicious cycle. And so it needs to be done prudently, I guess. And that's the questions. And
If you did a back of the envelope calculation showing that PNM does need the capacity, and then PNM filed an application showing that they need the capacity, wouldn't that be sufficient in your mind to say, oh yeah, they need the capacity?
yeah, I mean, 95% there. Yeah, I think what they've given us gets us pretty close to showing there's some need. Again, it would be nice to have granularity to make sure that 4-hour battery is the correct tool. And maybe that's going beyond the scope, but it certainly would be helpful for our support of the system.
Are you familiar with the RFP process at all?
Yes.
Okay, so you're aware that PNM is limited. So what it recommends to the commission, it's limited by what is bid into the RFP. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, and that's where I'm still learning that process, because it's again, that this RFP is not in the 2020 IRP action plan. So it's kind of, where did this one come from?
So are you aware that there was a change to the IRP rule? And the
Yes.
2020 IRP was operating under the old rule?
I wasn't sure where that cutoff was, or what exactly changed in the IRP rule.
And that RFPs used to not be linked to the IRP? Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay.
But you know, this one came after the Palo Verde replacement RFP, and so it's, you know, there's some. I think the other question I've had is, and Mr. Phillips touched on it, was this material change question. You know, in the IRP rule, you know, if you want to do a second RFP under the same IRP, you've got to notify the commission about a material change, and there's substantially more solar on the system in 2026 in the 2023 IRP than there is in the 2020. It's a 500 megawatt delta. That's pretty significant. That alone could drive the need for storage, just to, unless you're going to curtail all of that, you need something to absorb that. And so it, you know, again, it was, show us how you're going to use these things. It would be a little transparency would be helpful.
Are you aware of the purpose of the integrated resource plan? That it's like a planning tool?
Yes. Yeah.
And that they don't specify specific resources in that plan. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
They're generic resources.
Mm-hmm.
And then they do the plan, see what the need is now and under the new rule, and then they would issue our RFPs kind of based on the action plan. Is that your understanding?
Yes, under the new rule, yeah, and that's kind of where does that 2026 one fall? Is it under the new or the old rule? And I guess that's a legal thing that I'll stay out of.
Yeah, maybe you don't have to put that much attention on it, since this is like probably the only case where there's going to be this gap. But I guess my point is if there's no geothermal, if there's no hydropower bid into the RFP, PNM cannot create those projects out of whole cloth and present them to the commission. Is that accurate?
I guess so. I will take that as at your discretion. I mean, I don't know. I frankly don't know that detail.
Well, I guess what don't you know about it? Like,
well, I don't know how. I guess fundamentally, I'm just thinking about the future. If we need long duration storage and it's a 15-year horizon, but nobody bids on it because it's such a long horizon, and PNM is effectively chasing their tail to come up with something that's needed in 2 years, and they never get to that stage where they're looking for something 10 years down the road because that's what we need. I don't know how that ever gets into the process, and seems like a fundamental problem in the process. It's how do you build these big facilities that might be needed eventually to handle some large baseload customer in the future if you can't look more than a few years ahead of yourself.
okay. I guess my understanding of the RFP is not that they can't create long-term projects, like these battery storage projects are 20-year projects. Is that accurate?
They're 20 years, but they need to be in place in 2. If
Right.
we're constantly.
Well, okay, so I have a question on that. If we deny these batteries, don't you feel that puts PNM in a position where it's chasing its tail even more? How does that help the situation, denying these ESAs?
I'm not saying that there's no need for the resource. Again, it's kind of the tool, because they do there was an aeroderivative that made it to the short list. If energy is the problem, then that may be a better solution than a 4-hour battery. If capacity is the issue, then maybe the 4-hour battery is the solution for today. But that description didn't come up until yesterday when Mr. Phillips said we're capacity constrained. Right? That loss of load can have a couple of different factors. It could be ramping rate. The flexibility can cause loss of load, or capacity shortages can cause loss of load. And that wasn't clear to us until yesterday.
Okay, that's fair. We're all learning as we go.
Yeah.
I feel that very strongly. I guess nonetheless, if there's an RFP that's only batteries and PNM needs something, they have to put forth a proposal that has batteries in it. Is that fair?
You mean if the responses to their RFP only come back with batteries and that's their only option? Yeah, unless there's something else that they could. I suppose they could always reject it, but yeah, that wouldn't be prudent on the reliability side of things either. So yeah, that's kind of the crux of the problem, is they're kind of stuck with limited options because of the timelines, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it's part of the whole world transition problem, right? We're all trying to solve this big. Are you familiar with the Energy Transition Act, or the ETA?
Yes, I came from the State Energy Office, so I'm very familiar with it.
And are you aware that PNM has committed to be zero carbon by 2040?
Yes.
Do you have any awareness of any kind of viable hydrogen project that's out there in the world right now?
No, I mean the gas turbines. I mean, there's certainly gas turbines that can run at very high levels of hydrogen. Right now, just right out of the box, and they could potentially get to 100% hydrogen. people talk about the cost of making the hydrogen fuel, but again, if you're energy constrained and in the middle of winter and you need 4 hours of additional oomph, on your system, then who cares what the price of hydrogen is? You just need what you need, because it becomes a reliability issue again. So I've stressed renewable natural gas, because technically renewable natural gas under the ETA is a zero carbon resource.
What is- Sorry, excuse me.
It just, the definition, I think it was the wastewater treatment plant in Albuquerque that argued at the 11th hour in the ETA that their renewable natural gas that came out of their digester should be used, for compliance with the ETA as a zero carbon resource. So that definition was changed at the 11th hour in the legislature. And that tells me that renewable natural gas can be used as a zero carbon resource in the future. And again, unfortunately, we could have had a large gas storage facility in Rio Rancho, but that's gone. And, so that could have provided that, and other things could have provided. Again, there's not enough renewable natural gas to run your system, but can it get you through low energy events? I think in the future, that's something to look at.
In the future, but that's not really a viable option for right now, is that?
Well, it's not relevant because you can still burn natural gas. So it's one of those things where we shouldn't, there's a lot of things that have gone wrong. The retirement of Palo Verde. I worked many years operating a nuclear power plant, and then for PNM to exit a nuclear power plant just seemed kind of counterintuitive to me. But that's neither here or there. Especially when you have large base load increases on your system, it's a little counterintuitive. But
yeah, so I guess my point is just where we are here and now. And trying to make sure that the system is reliable. Do you think it's prudent for PNM to have a loss of load what does the E stand for? Loss of load probability or expectation of 1 or 1.3? Is that prudent? Okay.
No, that was kind of a shock. The fact that they're at that right now is kind of a shock. So that's.
Would that fact change your recommendation in this case to deny the ESAs?
Well, again, I'm not saying, I'm in this black and white position where I can't say I have confirmed the need. So then the only other option is to say there is no need. If you can't confirm something, then the opposite is there isn't one. But
you did confirm that
everything
has the need, right?
Yeah, to the granular extent that we have, which is not very granular. But yeah, go ahead.
Staff is tasked with representing the public interest. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And you would agree that it is in the public interest to have a reliable electric system. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's not staff's intent in suggesting that the commission deny these resources that it would wish to put the public in rolling blackouts. Is that correct?
No.
So putting the fact that you didn't really like PNM's application aside, do you think that customers should be put in risk because?
I'm going to object to this question as how she characterized Mr. Zigich's testimony as not really liking PNM's testimony.
I'll rephrase. Mr. Herrington.
Okay, I didn't catch the whole question anyhow to make a determination on that, so rephrase and I'll review.
Your testimony, you stated in your testimony here today that there wasn't enough information for you to be able to recommend that the commission approve the ESAs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you think that customers should be at risk because of that?
No, I mean, again, I don't want to be a roadblock. I mean, I'm trying to, I would rather say, yes, this is a prudent decision. There's a need there. It's a prudent decision. Go for it. I just I can't back it without enough information, and hopefully in the future we'll get to that point of what do we need for, so that we can go full force backing these things. Clearly there is some deficiency there, but we would like a little more granularity and a little bit of that information more forthright than it came in. So, but yeah, no, I don't think anything, should stop, a safe, reliable system from moving forward. I think our backing just makes it easier when it comes time for paying for the things. Hopefully.
Is it your expert opinion that 89 megawatts is an adequate amount of reserve for PNM to get through the summer months?
No.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
That I said no, that's kind of concerning.
Are you aware that PNM has struggled with resource adequacy since the abandonment of San Juan Generating Station?
I didn't know the extent of it probably as well as I do now after yesterday.
Are you aware of PNM's biweekly resource adequacy calls?
Yes, and I haven't been signed up on those, but I did reach out last week and got on the list, so I will be attending those as I can.
But you're generally aware that the commission has been very concerned about PNM's resource adequacy, and so it required PNM to have these calls?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Have you or any of the other staff witnesses that you know have been trained on SERVM or the Encompass modeling?
No, my understanding is SERVM is a proprietary system, so I don't. I would appreciate a little more information on those, moving forward again. But I've done other, probabilistic modeling in the past, and computational fluid dynamics and predictive emissions monitoring and all sorts of things 20 years ago, and in the early days when these things were coming online. So I have a feel for what they're doing, but some more information would be certainly useful. But it's very hard for us to do the modeling that Mr. Wintermantle does in-house, so that's why we need it distilled down a little bit to where we can actually see the situation, see what they're talking about, and any of that information is helpful so that we can see what they're seeing, I guess.
So you think it would be helpful for you or someone else on staff to have training on these models, is that correct?
Again, I don't know if we would necessarily need to run, the same model, of course. But, you know, if they can highlight us to the problem year or time, you know, then at least maybe, yeah, if we had some simplified model, we could just confirm that we get the same results that they are. That would be a very easy way, I think, to confirm and really back these systems moving forward, is if we could have some visibility into that.
Are you aware that PNM provides access to the models and also training on the models?
No, I don't. I didn't know that.
Are you aware that NM area has access to the models and has also conducted training on the models?
No, I didn't know that.
If you know, you had talked about the hours that need to be served. Like, sorry, this isn't a very good question, but that if there's more than 4 hours, then maybe a 4-hour battery wouldn't be sufficient. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes.
And that perhaps longer duration batteries would be a better choice. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you know if 4-hour batteries can be stacked? So if you get two 4-hour batteries, they can operate as 8-hour batteries?
Yes, I'm very aware of that because I designed and, you know, contracted the Hyde Park off-grid, you know, the Hyde Memorial State Park is an off-grid microgrid that's powered solely by solar and batteries. There's 32 hours of battery storage up there, but that's 1.5 million for a 10 kilowatt system. That would be $150 billion for PNM's system. I don't think we want to go there. That's my concern with 4-hour batteries. You stack them, and it adds up very fast. It goes exponential in a hurry to infinite pricing, basically.
And there's kind of like a curve shape. So at the top of the curve, like if it's narrower, a 4-hour battery would be sufficient to meet the peak, right? But then as you go down the curve, you need longer and longer batteries. Is that accurate?
Yes, and you know, my longer range view, I mean, maybe the 4-hour batteries satisfy today for that peak summer load, but the longer view, I mean, you can already see in April and May, PNM's current fleet of wind and solar overproduces the system need. So who's banking that energy, or is it just getting curtailed? That's a lot of dollars just getting shed. I mean, I know we do that at Hyde Park. You know, it comes up at 10 o'clock in the morning and the solar cuts off because the batteries are full. You know, so it's again, as the system grows, that need changes, and you know, you could get to the day where the 4-hour batteries don't have much use, and that's a lot of money.
But maybe we're not there yet. Maybe at this point in time, 4-hour batteries could help the system.
Yeah, but it could be a very short window.
So you said that you are familiar with the Lightning Dock project. Are you aware that it is underperforming?
Yes.
And do you know the cost per megawatt hour of that project?
I think the PPA was about $99 and $98 a megawatt.
I have something more, but it might be due to some inflationary tax. So,
oh yeah, I think you know, they renegotiated that PPA when they came out of bankruptcy 6 years ago or so. I remember at that. But yeah, ever since they expanded that facility, they've been losing temperature. And I used to get in my old position, I used to get their monthly reports on because we at MNERD, we were the permittee for the geothermal class UIC permit.
So it's not your testimony that the geothermal is a reliable resource to cover this capacity need, is that?
Well, you couldn't bring it on. Again, that's the problem with the 2-year window to brings resources on. There's not the time for those longer lead time types of projects. But in that area, I mean, Canadian firm, you might know, they drilled an 18,000 foot well down there, and there's good heat down there. But to bring that online is going to take some time.
Mr. Ziglich, I'm wondering if you could move closer to your microphone.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir.
So on page 6 of your testimony, you make claims regarding the special service customer. Is that correct?
Page 6. What? I'm sorry. What
Hold
line?
on. Sorry, I don't know. Let me see that I had it on the
That was lower. Oh yeah.
hard because yeah, if it's so I'm on page 6, line 14.
Yeah. Okay. You got it.
I was just curious if you've read the special service contract.
I've looked at parts of it, the different, there's been a number of amendments to it over the years, but I've read some of it. So I was curious about the no adverse impact clause.
So excuse me, before you wrote this testimony, you said you read parts of it or after?
It was after.
Okay. So when you wrote your testimony, you had not read the special service contract.
Not the contract, the rate, I'm sorry, the rate 36B and the 47 rider I had read,
Okay.
but not the contract itself.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for all your expertise and for this conversation. And, I think that it's, all the different places you've worked in New Mexico, you bring a lot of expertise to the agency, and I look forward to working with you in these cases moving forward. And hopefully we can, figure some of these larger resource adequacy issues out as we move forward. So I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have 2:18 on my phone. So we've been going for almost an hour and 20 minutes. I think before I turn the floor over to Mr. Harris, why don't we take a 10-minute break, give Mr. Zigich a chance to catch his breath, and we will resume at 2:30. All right, I have 2:30 on my phone, so let's get everyone back. Are you ready, Mr. Court Reporter?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, next for cross-exam, we have Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner, and good afternoon, Mr. Zigich. Am I pronouncing
Yes,
that? Okay,
yes,
thank
yes, you are, Sigich.
you. Never met you. I'm sure the commission and staff is extremely happy to have you added. They really needed some more resources.
Thank you.
Okay. I've been scribbling like crazy during the cross of you, so if my questions are less than clear, please let me know and I will clarify my question. Okay, please turn to page 4.
My testimony?
Yes, of your testimony.
Okay. I'm there.
Okay, on lines 15 to 17, you discuss these proposed resources in PNM's RFP. Are all those proposed resources supply side resources?
The ones they're proposing in this case,
Yes.
they would be under all PNM's control. Yeah, so.
Well, but what I meant by that, excuse my over talking you, was that these resources are either adding, in the case of the PPA, capacity, energy capacity, or they're an attempt to firm up those the existing renewables. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, that's what's a little unclear, right? I mean, they're being proposed as resource adequacy.
Right, but their purpose is basically to address some of the reliability concerns on the system.
Yeah, for those peak times, yes.
Right, and it's on the energy side of things. And the reason I'm asking that question is, was there any proposals made by PNM in this case to address demand reduction of the loss of load expectation by addressing the demand side of the equation? So if you would reduce the demand, then it could also, would you agree with me that if you reduce the demand, you could also be addressing efficiency and the reliability?
Yeah, I understand it. And I believe there was a demand response proposal, a response to the RFP. I don't think it made it down to the short list because questions on implementation or something, but I think one of the many responses that they got to this RFP was a demand response solution of some magnitude. But I didn't really look at the details because it never made it down to the final short list.
Okay. Now, would it be your opinion that demand side means of approaching the problem of system reliability is something that should be looked at?
Yes, yeah, and I think PNM definitely, recognizes that in their IRP they have some demand side, energy efficiency. Of course, it's very important. Demand side management again has some limitations. I think Nick Phillips has talked about this in the past about how, you know, you can only call on it so many hours a year and then you're contractually done. I mean, I suppose that could always change over time, but it, you know, it has, sometimes it takes participation by the customer, and that isn't 100% reliable either. So there are some challenges, I think, with demand response. Plus, sometimes it just kicks that problem down the road, and so your peak becomes a later issue, because if you let your house warm up, eventually you got to cool it down, you know. And so it has diminishing returns, just like a lot of resources do.
Okay. When you're referring to what PNM was looking at on the demand side, did that include time of use rates and trying to encourage customers to reduce their usage?
You know, again, I don't know what, for this specific situation, I don't know what the details of that. I just remember seeing that there was a demand response or some sort of a demand side management program proposed to PNM, but it never made it far down the list. And so I don't know the details on that. But yeah, I mean, they're looking at time of use rates, of course, and other things. But again, I think Mr. Phillips rightfully points out a lot of issues, you know, with his explanation of, you know, if you're on a ventilator, your options are limited compared to someone that just, you know, can be uncomfortable for a couple hours. So it really is, that your bigger bang for your buck usually is with your big industrial sources. And
Okay, and was there any analysis of how to address that in the application and the file testimony about how to address this through, you know, those larger sources?
no, I certainly didn't. I mean, it wasn't something on the table.
Okay, thank you.
And I didn't see it as it wasn't our job to find alternatives, basically.
Okay, thanks. You know, I have to continue to apologize for me over talking you. Let's turn to page 6 of your testimony.
Okay.
Okay, on page or on line 15, you express a concern. What exactly is the basis of your concern?
Well, it's there. You know, PNM is seeing unprecedented growth, I think, at the same time that they're trying to transition the energy mix. And it puts them, and I don't envy their position. It puts them in a tough spot moving forward, because I think the energy transition assumed that, like had been historic at the time, load growth was pretty flat due to energy efficiency efforts, and then the rollout of rooftop solar and everything else. You know, loads were going down almost and then going up. But when you have new things come online, whole AI, I mean, there's plenty of news out there about data centers and AI and all this others, these loads coming on the system. You know, all the utilities are seeing this, not just PNM. It puts a strain on that transition, and unfortunately, I think it speeds up this transition, because some of these big loads want clean energy. So you've got a big load that's equivalent to basically 2 Santa Fe's getting built within 10 years to, that wants to be 100% renewable on a system that's 30% renewable and trying to transition up to 80%. That creates an imbalance, I think, in the system. Now, there's contractual language of no adverse impacts, but what does that exactly mean? I can certainly, when I was with the state energy office, we used to deal with energy service performance contracting. And there's certainly institutions in Valencia County that have been told they can't put solar on their campuses because systems are overloaded at certain times. So, what is an adverse impact? It's an adverse impact if it affects you today, I guess. But so it's just there's a lot of push and pull on the system right now, and I applaud PNM for trying to manage this, but it is a complicated situation, and I don't know if there's it's just a concern that needs to be watched, because I think the loads there are increasing faster than anybody had planned. And unfortunately, some of these industrial or large consumer loads are flat loads, which pair up very nicely with nuclear. And unfortunately, we retired some of our nuclear capacity and are trying to mend fill the leaking vessel with batteries and solar, and it's a difficult task, I think.
Okay. And am I correct that this isn't really a new problem? It's been out there for several years, especially since the state has set a goal of being non-carbon. So this problem has been out there for several years now. Is that correct?
What you mean, the increased RPS and the Energy Transition Act, or the increased load?
Well, the problem I'm really referring to is how to address the problems that are now occurring because of the renewables that are being put on the system.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, once you get to basically 30+% renewable, that means at certain times of the year you're going to be over generating. So either turn that power off and waste it, like I was explaining, we do up at Hyde Park, because there's nowhere for it to go because they're off grid, or you store it somewhere. And then the same goes for the winter, where you're kind of energy limited. So it causes, once you get to a certain point, you have to put in more and more storage to counter the variability, and storage is an energy drain because of efficiency problems. And so then you have to put on more generation. So you get into a cycle that can get costly, I think.
Now, would you agree with me that in a sense, this is a pretty important case, not only in terms of dollars, but we're trying to get our hands around how in the world we're going to address these needs that we see fast approaching?
I'm sorry, was there a question in there?
I started by saying, do you agree with me that this case is an important case, because it's trying to get the commission's hands around how are we going to address this problem? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, each utility is a little different. Their energy mix is different. SPS, highly industrial load, much different load pattern than PNM. But in PNM traditionally has been about 90% small commercial and residential load. Very, very little, except for that chip maker in Rio Rancho, there's not a lot of industrial load on the PNM system until recently, and it's increasing at a very high rate, and it just changes the fundamentals. I mean, someday we may start looking like SPS's grid, and that would just be a fundamental change. And so the resource mix you bring to bear to match that kind of load might be fundamentally different than what you would for a residential commercial load. And so that's just something to watch. That's kind of where my concern is that the load is changing, and are we looking at that moving forward?
Also, as part of those lines on lines 16 to 17 on page 6, you also express a concern over a need for energy storage that's not solely tied to system-wide resource adequacy. Can you explain that concern?
Can you point me to where?
That's on lines 16 to 17 on page 6.
Yeah, well, that was kind of it went back to asking, was the loss of load expectation that they calculated, trying to approach the 0.1, that's what we were asking, was that expectation, the loss of load potential, due to a lack of capacity on the system, or was it a lack of ramping capability? Because Mr. Wintermantle in 2017 has on his website, they have a nice slide deck that explains the difference between the two loss of load events. One is you don't have enough capacity, you don't have enough ramping capacity with your current resources to take care of that cloud that drops out of 500 megawatts of solar, or 300 whatever it is. You don't have enough ramping capacity to match that decrease. That's one loss of load potential, and then there's just the flat out, we don't have enough power to get through the day. And so I mean, I think Mr. Phillips explained that it is a capacity constraint right now, but that could shift in the future. And I didn't have his testimony yesterday when I wrote this. I mean, it's nice to know that it's strictly a capacity and not a ramping piece, but still having additional solar on the system, unless you're going to start curtailing that, you need somewhere for it to go. And so that can drive the need for storage for other reasons. And clearly that was one of our questions to PNM, was how are your existing, because they have 2 battery systems online right now, Arroyo and Hickoria. And we asked them, that they've been online since the 3rd quarter of 2023. And we asked them for that charge discharge data, and they sent it to us after, again, some angst, but they sent it to us, and clearly they're using those batteries daily. So those batteries are being used in October and November, long ways from the July peak day. So they're not being used for resource adequacy per se. They're being used for load management and resource management.
Okay, thank you. Following up on that, let's turn to page 7.
Okay.
Lines 6 to 10.
Okay.
Where you're talking about less than fully transparent, especially on line 7, especially when the 2020 IRP envisioned removal of Four Corners generating station. Can you explain why that's a concern?
Well, this kind of goes back to the whole resource adequacy and, you know, the whole need for the batteries. What is its primary purpose? I think for a while there, we were, you know, the 2020 IRP envisioned the Four Corners would be offline by this year. The Supreme Court said, no, keep it online. So that means Four Corners will be online in 2026. That wasn't really envisioned in the 2020 IRP. So I probably wrongfully assumed that they were going to, it was kind of a question, were they dropping Four Corners from their resource adequacy modeling? But it appears that this was based on the 2023 IRP. So again, it's kind of going back to, we were making the case that the modeling or this RFP was not really serving the 2020 IRP. It was serving the 2023 IRP. And I think me and Ms. Gould got into that of, you know, what the chicken and the egg thing of what comes first, the RFP or the IRP, and what was the timing of the new rule and all of that stuff. So I think there was some concern by staff that they were putting the RFP before the IRP. And so that's really where some of that came. But again, that additional solar capacity that is real, it wasn't envisioned in the 2020 IRP in 2026. There's a 500 megawatt gap. Now, 300 of that is due to a certain special services customer. So that, you know, it's just kind of going back to that. What is that impact, both on a load side and both on a resource side? Because that customer wants 100% renewable. So it's very hard to parse out a system on, you know, this neighborhood is going to be 100% renewable and the rest of this neighborhood is going to be 30%. You know, how do you parse that out? That's just kind of, again, raising that issue.
Thanks. You mentioned, I believe, that when you were at Energy and Minerals, you worked on Palo Verde. Sorry.
No, Lightning Dock.
Pardon me? Oh,
Lightning Dock. I was the permit authority for Lightning Dock geothermal.
okay. So I misunderstood. Did you listen to the cross-examination of Mr. Sidler yesterday?
This morning?
Pardon me?
This morning, yes.
And he had mentioned the abandonment of the Palo Verde leases. Are you aware of those?
Yes.
What impact does the abandonment of those leases have if it, let's just for argument purposes here, assume that those leases hadn't been abandoned, what impact would that have had on the loss of load expectation?
Mr. Hearing Examiner, Rick Alvidrez, I would like to lodge an objection. This is friendly cross. What we've seen is that Mr. Harris has been taking Mr. Ziggett through his testimony, asking him to expand upon what it is he said. And I notice, I know Mr. Harris had talked earlier that his purpose in conducting discovery in this case, in examining witnesses, is to conduct discovery. And I would direct you to Rule 1.2.2.25A, I believe it is, which says that examination at the hearing is not the place to conduct discovery. So I think we've given a lot of leeway here, but this is friendly cross. It's not proper cross-examination.
I acknowledge the objection. On the flip side, Mr. Harris's cross-examination to date has largely been based upon expanding his knowledge of some of the issues at hand. So while I note the objection as friendly cross, I'm going to allow him to continue. And also noting that we are getting close to the half-hour mark too. There's 5 minutes left. So I'm gonna allow it to continue. I do note your objection, though.
Mr. Hearing Examiner, let me also respond. In times past, the objection that's raised is not by the attorney for the witness. And PNM comes in, and that has been prohibited in the past. If there's an objection to the cross-examination of witness, it generally comes from the attorney for the witness. That's one thing. And another thing is that this isn't friendly cross because the Water Authority hasn't taken a position yet. And we're trying to determine in this case, based upon an expansion of our understanding of what the case is about, what position to take. So it is not only is it improper for Mr. Alvidrez to object to my cross-examination, it is also not friendly cross.
As I elaborated, I do not consider this friendly cross based upon, especially in consideration of your other cross-examinations of the witnesses. So I've already made in my statement there. In terms of who can object during my hearings, any party is free to object if they feel it's friendly cross. Any intervener can make that objection because clearly the person who put the witness on isn't going to object to friendly cross. They're going to say, please continue. So I think to the extent that, you have stated that Mr. Alvidrez was incorrect in making that objection for friendly cross, that I will I've already made my ruling that you can continue anyway, but just for further elaboration, for further hearings, I feel that was correct.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. And I think you're correct. I overrule myself.
I'm glad.
I've seen hearing examiners overrule themselves after asking a question as well. Okay, moving right along, we're going to have to be pretty quick here. On page 8, line 14, you refer to PNM's 23 IRP. The question is, did staff recently provide a report as requested by the commission in case 2020-23-00408? And as a result of that, did you have a part in that? And does that report, does that change anything that you have in your?
No, I think some of my testimony here may have made its way into that report, kind of in a minute way, but I was not in charge of that report. I made a few minor comments. Some of it was just textual comments, so I was not a primary provider of that effort.
Okay, thanks. I'm cutting you off because I have very little time here.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's go to page 18. And lines 1 to 5. Oh, okay, no, I correct that. Page 18 that goes on to page 19, and I'm going to starting with line 7, where you're talking about siloing. In your opinion, I'll summarize. It's my understanding of what you're saying is that you should really consider the combined cost of renewable resource with the batteries to back it up, because that's the way the system is working now, and compare that total cost to the cost of something like an aerodyne. Does that correctly summarize what you're saying?
Yes, and I think PNM to some extent agrees with that position. Even in Mr. Phillips' rebuttal, I think he's talking about how they're looking at the future and how they're going to be costing these things, because clearly it's very hard to put a 100 megawatt solar array on the system now without storage.
Right.
And so if you have two resources and one's geothermal at $80 and one's solar at $20, don't just take the solar, you gotta look at the total package, and that's really all that is. And I think PNM is well aware of that situation moving forward. You can no longer just put that low cost variable source on your system without some consequence.
Well, thanks. And if that were done in this case, when the RFPs were sent out and then analyzed, could that have potentially made a difference in the results of the bid process?
I didn't get into the dollars and cents all that much. I think all of that was looked at, including interconnection costs and all sorts of other variables that are included in the cost. So I think there's, yeah, it's hard to say exactly how that was all put together, but I think they feel that they've got the lowest cost solution for the immediate problem. It's just how immediate is that problem? It's putting a Band-Aid on a system that is going to need more Band-Aids, and it's when you get the big wrap, I guess.
On page 19, lines 15 to 16, you state that batteries aren't the best with the large and long-term arbitrage. Why is this, and what's the most cost-effective tool?
I'm sorry. Can you say what page that is again?
At page 19, lines 15 to 16.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, the long-term energy, this goes back years. We've talked about you've got seasonal issues. In April and May, we generate a lot of solar and a lot of wind in New Mexico, and so you're usually energy heavy in those months. And then eventually, as things electrify, including our heating systems and vehicles, December and January are going to be problematic, and PNM recognizes this. They're well aware of it, but there may be a day when you're going to need to store that April and May to get through December and January, and that gets very costly. That may eventually be the reality, but that's the problem. I don't think anybody's really presented that picture of what that end game is, and it's a little. It causes me some hesitation, and that's probably why I'm a little conservative on just saying that this looks good. Yes.
Okay, thanks. And you have made some criticism of the 4-hour batteries, and with, as I recall it, a preference for the longer duration batteries. Are there places now that are experimenting with or implementing longer term batteries, and do they use the same technology that is proposed in this case, i.e. the lithium-ion batteries?
Yeah, there's all sorts of trial things going on in the city of Sacramento. I think their utility is working with a flow battery that's 10, 12 hours. So there are things out there. Pumped hydro, of course, has been around for a long time. There's a pumped hydro facility next to a nuclear power plant that I worked at that they pump water uphill at nighttime because they didn't want to ramp the nuclear power plant, so they would just pump water. That's a technology that's been around a long time, and we certainly have elevation changes here, and I think eventually we're going to have to start looking at that seriously as a potential resource.
Okay. And on page 20, I'll just refer to it, that you're estimating the cost of the ESAs to be $1 billion. How is that $1 billion calculated?
I think that was just the summation of we had didn't I reference, I think my exhibit DKZ5 has their 20-year revenues. So it was the ESA and the EPC storage, their estimated revenue requirement was 979 million. So I rounded up.
Yeah, in this business, close is good enough because we're
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not playing horseshoes.
Well, thank you for your testimony. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. I have just a couple questions before I turn it back over to Mr. Borman to take us home here. Ms. Gould touched on it in regards to the biweekly calls with PNM, but I also want to ask, are you aware of or reviewed what is docket 21-00159 PNM, which is a docket that was opened by the Commission for Resource Adequacy? Are you familiar with that docket at all?
I am not. No.
Okay. In regards to, I want to turn to page 17 of your testimony. Just get there. And one of your testimony lines that I want to ask you about is on line 15 of page 17. You indicate, while the batteries may deliver the resource adequacy for a particular day in 2026, they do not provide energy to the system. That line stood out to me a little bit because doesn't that help cover an LOLE that is over 1.29? Isn't that the point? Or
It is.
Elaborate on that for me, please.
Yeah, it is if the battery is charged. And the concern, and that's where the granularity question comes into play, is, PNM basically has 1,400 megawatts of dispatchable power on their system. If they get constrained on imports from other systems, that summer load in July stays above 1,400 all day, all night, or pretty darn close. And there's not a whole lot of energy on that system unless, hopefully the next day is a bright sunny day and that solar can charge those batteries in the morning, because the wind is almost useless in July. I mean, it's not completely useless, but it's very low. And so is there enough energy on the system to charge those batteries so that the next 8 o'clock at night period is ready, the batteries are ready for discharge? And that's the big concern with short duration storage, is you don't know if you're ever going to have it online. We've run into that problem at Hyde Park, especially in the winter, because all these RVs are plugging in up there and they run their space heaters all winter long, and we just don't have enough energy. And so our propane generator runs quite a bit in winter up there. It'd be cheaper to give people propane for their campers than to generate charge the battery so that they can run their heaters. So it's all on energy, it's capacity and energy. If you don't have either one, you're in dire straits.
Which brings me to my next, actually, that's a great lead in for my next question, since you said it's better to give people propane. You indicate when asked what would be a better tool, you said preferably a resource that provides clean dispatchable power like geothermal, hydro, or renewable clean fuel resource that is not energy constrained. Did staff do any review or evaluation regarding whether a tool like that would be feasible by May 2026.
No, we didn't look at alternatives.
Okay. That's all my questions. Mr. Borman, redirect. Thank us
I
all.
do have a few questions on redirect. First, Mr. Alvidra's talked to you briefly about the 2020 IRP. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And he and you both discussed that the 2020 IRP was approved. Do you recall that?
yeah,
Are IRPs approved or are they accepted?
believe it's technically accepted.
Now, Ms. Gould later talked to you about, I think she mentioned PNM's goal of, or commitment to meet, to be 100% renewable by 2040. And if I've misstated that, someone please correct me, but do you recall having that discussion?
Yeah, I think it's 100% zero carbon
Okay.
by
So,
2040.
What, do you know what the statutory requirement is under, technically it's the REA, not the ETA, for renewable use by utilities by 2040?
80%.
Okay. And do you know when utilities are required to meet their supply requirements with 100% carbon-free electricity?
The IOUs have to meet that by 2045.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, Ms. Gould asked you about the special service contract and the no adverse impact clause. Do you recall that?
Yeah, we had some brief discussion on that, yeah.
Okay, and well, let me ask it this way. Do you agree that, I mean, do the parties actually have to take an action to enforce this provision?
I do not know.
Maybe, that's a poorly asked question. The mere fact that there's a provision in a contract that requires this does not actually make it so, does it?
No, and I mean, adverse impact to a customer is so broad that it's hard to, is it direct cost to a customer, or is it, by placing something on the system, that means somebody else doesn't have the opportunity to place something on the system, and that could be a lost opportunity, could be the same as an adverse impact. So it's a complicated question, I guess.
Yeah, recognizing that you're not a lawyer, somebody has to take action to enforce that provision. Is that correct?
Mr. Hearing, Sam,
Yes.
I'm gonna object. I only asked him if he had read the contract. I didn't get into the terms of the contract. It's beyond the scope of my questioning.
And I believe he indicated he did not.
I'll withdraw the question.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay. Cross-examine redirect on this witness has concluded. The witness is excused. And that is the end of the presentation of evidence in here. The commission's initial order indicated they wanted to make a final determination by May 1st, 2024 on the PPA and ESA, and by July 25th on the SSP. I have not quite determined if I will issue two separate recommended decisions or just be very busy this next month to do them both. But I would expect briefing on both issues. Please, in the event that I decide to make one recommended decision in a timely fashion. I couldn't help. I'm going to reveal my German and Netherlands roots, I guess. I'm sitting here and I'm going, this is a dike problem. We have a hole in the dike. And as you all probably imagine from your childhood, right? We have the guy with the wood shoes that has to go up to the hole in the dike and put his finger in it to stop it from leaking and flooding the village. Right now, we have a leak. We have an LOLE that is 1.0, and just like a hole in a dike, that if you don't plug it, it's going to continue to grow and get worse and more flooding, leading us up to an LOLE of 1.29 in 2026. Some people are going to say, well, you need to replace the entire dike. Okay, that's a long-term solution. In the interim, though, you have to stop the flooding. You're going to have to pay a guy to go up there, stick his finger in the dike, and someone's going to say, well, that's expensive to pay that guy. Okay. I think as Mr. Harris indicated, this is an important case for that reason, because it's going to guide us how this commission is going to want to go in terms of figuring out the longer term solutions here. Whether we accept the battery as a Band-Aid / person putting his finger in the dike to get us through the time until we can have better dispatchable energy, like as Mr. Zigich expanded. So we're stuck at a crossroads. So I do feel that briefing, should reflect the importance of this matter, because I don't consider it to be a small one. That being said, I'm not going to shorten briefing. I don't think this issue deserves a shortened time frame. So once the transcript is loaded and dispersed, full briefing deadlines, both briefing and response deadlines, please. I want to have an individual order with individual questions on it. I think we're all aware of the issues at hand. But I'm sure everyone will have that in their briefing, but I do expect a full review of the requirements of a CNC, the full requirements of approval for a battery storage, and if they were met or not. But I appreciate everyone's professionalism. With the hearing to yesterday and today, this is how I enjoy my virtual courtrooms to be. So I appreciate everyone being cordial with everyone and professionalism everywhere. This is how I like my courtrooms running. Any questions?
Mr. Hearing Examiner.
All right, let me do, Ms. Gould got her hand up right before you blurted it out, so let me do her question and I'll come over to you. Ms. Gould.
Sorry, I just wanted clarity. When you say full briefing, you mean just what's in the rules? Is that correct?
Yeah, the full deadlines that the rules allow for, which
Okay.
I always crisscross briefing deadlines and exceptions. So rather than misquote them here, full deadlines apply based upon the rules. And response briefs, which sometimes I curtail.
And that will start, the timing would start, like today's the last day of hearing, so we would start counting tomorrow. Would that be?
I believe it starts counting from when the transcript is made available.
Oh, right. That's right. You're right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I guess my question would be, when do we know when that will happen?
Usually the court reporter takes 7 to 10 days, and I don't try to push them any further than that. But if Mr. Lee wants to expound upon if it's going to happen sooner than that, he can feel free, but I'm not going to require him to answer that. Mr. Alvidrez.
Yes, Mr. Examiner, the reason that I did want to be heard is on that very issue. PNM has in the past, and I've been authorized in this case, to pay for the incremental cost of an expedited transcript, so that it will give the parties a bit more. Well, it will really give you a bit more time to consider the matter. So we're willing to do that if Mr. Lee is amenable to expediting this transcript.
That is usually something we have worked out ahead of time with our court reporter based upon a request. So I don't feel it would be appropriate to ask Mr. Lee to do that, at the end of the hearing. Usually that is something we coordinate with them, like the week heading into hearing, so they have advanced, so they can review their calendar and give us some feedback if that's doable or not. That being said, I've had court reporters before that do their best to get it done in a very timely fashion, but Mr. Lee's schedule is what Mr. Lee's schedule is already accounted for. So I'm not going to I appreciate the gesture to offer to pay for it, but I'm not going to require Mr. Lee to do that.
Understood. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, everyone. Mr. Lee, do you need any information before we adjourn? You're on mute.
No, sir.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Harry.